Chain Drug Review, and Mass Market Retailers Video Forum. Brought to you by the Emerson Group.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Wolt, Editor-in-Chief of Chain Drug Review and Mass Market Retailers. Welcome to our video forum. Today, we're thrilled to have Chip Davis, President and CEO of the Healthcare Distribution Alliance, with us. Chip, welcome back.
Jeffrey, always good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
The Drug Supply Chain Security Act was passed in 2013. We've had a very lengthy implementation process. Is the supply chain going to be ready this November?
Yeah, great question, Jeffrey. Yeah, we're having so much fun. We added a year on, right? So I think the short answer is I think the entire supply chain will be more prepared than it would have been had we gone with the 2023 November date. And in large part, I think the phased-in implementation that HDA, our member companies, and other stakeholders in the supply chain advocated for was a really important development. In light of the fact that, as you know, one of our other really big issues is drug shortages. And what we wanted to do was make sure that DSCSA gets implemented as originally designed without exacerbating because one or more sectors of the pharmaceutical supply chain may not have been fully operationally ready. We did not want to exacerbate drug shortages any more than they already currently exist. So I think that was a sensitivity that was shared sort of up and down the pharmaceutical supply chain. I also think, quite frankly, and credit to the FDA, that they recognized that themselves. They came to their own conclusion there, but they had a lot of conversations both with us, our member companies, as well as with manufacturers in the pharmacy community. So what we have been doing now, it feels a little bit like deja vu all over again from last summer to this summer, is we have stayed in close contact with our trading partners. We see more connectivity now than we did 6 months ago or even 12 months ago, so that's the good news. But there's still more work to be done, to be completely candid, and we're focusing a lot on the relationships that we have with the pharmacy community, particularly in areas like independent and community pharmacy, where they may not have the same level of resources that some of the large retail or chain drug stores do have, to ensure the greatest state of operational readiness. Because what the FDA has said, FDA leadership has said very recently at conferences, is that they don't see another extension in the offing.
And your three biggest members obviously are critical to the success of independent pharmacy in this regard.
Correct, yes. Through their pharmacy networks, I think all three of them do an exemplary job of ensuring that they are providing an infrastructure and support base for the independent community pharmacies that they have relationships with.
COVID exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in supply chains of all types around the world. How has the pharmaceutical sector responded to that challenge, and what's HDA doing to try and make the supply chain more resilient in the future?
I recall back to when I started here at HDA the first week of March 2020. So literally as COVID was arriving on the shores of the U.S., and I can remember very clearly within my first 10 days or so being at a local supermarket and looking down the aisle for paper products and seeing the shelves completely empty. And then I had this sort of borderline realization or frightening moment where I thought, what happens if if the same reality hits behind the pharmacy counter? And it didn't. And that was a real credit to everybody from the manufacturers, to our members, to the frontline providers, the pharmacies and the like. But I think it actually showed the resilience of the supply chain that was in existence at the time of COVID. It doesn't mean we can't improve upon it. Were there some gaps? Were there some learnings that we had? Absolutely. And I think in particular, one of the things that was a key takeaway was the importance of enhancing public-private partnerships. The relationship with government agencies, both here in Washington and throughout the states, to make sure that when problems arose, there was the ability for the supply chain to be coordinated, not just within itself, but in also working with government agencies to make sure that in cases where you remember dealing with things like pop-up hospitals and the like, and various certifications that were required to be got, that wasn't an impediment to patients and providers having access to the medicines that they needed to. So that's been a key area of focus for us, is whether we're dealing with folks within the Department of Health and Human Services, ASPR as an example, or in the Department of Homeland Security, that we've been talking to them repeatedly and keep the doors and dialogues dialogues open to make sure that we're having conversations that will ensure that we are in even better shape for the next emergency, whether it be a natural disaster or hopefully not a future pandemic.
Do you see supply chains getting shorter? Will the sources of active pharmaceutical ingredients come closer to the U.S. than they are today?
Yeah, that's a big conversation, as you know, Jeffrey, around where our products are sourced from, everything from active pharmaceutical ingredients, key starting materials to finished product. Our perspective, recognizing that this is first and foremost a manufacturing issue, but because of the close partnerships that we have with the manufacturing community, our view is there certainly is an opportunity for more domestic manufacturing here in the States. So certainly onshoring and even nearshoring if you look at opportunities, say, within Canada and Mexico. At the same time, we can't lose sight of the fact that there is value in having a global supply chain in terms of the ability to respond to issues or emergencies across the world. I think one of the things that we have to have a really honest conversation about in order to fix what is perceived by many to be a current imbalance is how did we get there in the first place? Right? There used to be much more manufacturing, particularly in the generic space. There's still more in the brand space than there is in the generic space here in the United States. But how did we get to where we are? And if we don't address some of the underlying economic realities associated with how we got to where we are, then I feel like we are at risk for maybe only seriously considering what would be considered stopgap measures. So I think over time, we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. But I do think there is growing consensus that there's an opportunity to make sure that, let's say in the instance of the generic drug industry, there are opportunities for those companies, incentives for those companies that say the government can provide to encourage them to enhance their manufacturing capabilities here in the United States or close by.
You mentioned drug shortages earlier, Chip. What can your members do to help mitigate that problem?
Yeah, I think we have experienced, certainly over the past couple of years, as we've seen a spike in drug shortages, Jeffrey, that's consistent with, or in many ways, unfortunately, worse than what we were experiencing 10 years ago. Not surprisingly, a lot of them, to the last conversation we had, are in the generic space, and a significant percentage of that component are in the generic sterile injectable space. And I think one of the areas that we have to spend a little bit more time focused on, in addition to where products are manufactured, is recognizing that here in the United States, the generic industry has operated remarkably well for decades. It has provided high-value products at affordable prices to a point where now approximately 90% of all prescriptions in the United States are generics. But sometimes you can take that success for granted. And I think one of the things we have to recognize is that in many instances, we have a higher utilization rate at lower price points on average than most other developed markets across the world from a healthcare perspective. And so we run the risk, I believe, of potentially, particularly with generic sterile injectables, of as a healthcare ecosystem and even by extension as a society, maybe not valuing them at a sufficiently high level. And the point I would like to make, because I think there's a lot of discussion about what can the supply chain do. The supply chain, starting with the manufacturers and then, say, distributors or GPOs or others that negotiate price, is a reflection of what the demands are downstream, whether you're talking about hospitals, physicians, other points of care, even the general public, right? We're in a presidential election year. How many times are we going to hear candidates running for office, whether it's president, the House, the Senate, that drug costs are too high? This is not a new debate. And I think we have to collectively, as stakeholders in the supply chain, begin to have that conversation to say, in certain instances, the issue might not be that drugs are too high priced in the United States, but that we actually need to do something collectively to provide a level of sustainability to some of these manufacturers, again, in the generic injectable space, that I think would be important for a greater understanding and to ensure the continued business performance of a number of manufacturers in that arena.
Change Healthcare recently experienced a major cyber attack,
Sure.
which crippled the whole healthcare system. What is HDA and its membership doing to secure the cybersecurity of the supply chain?
Yeah, it's been a real eye-opening experience. I wouldn't characterize it as a wake-up call per se, Jeffrey, because I think folks have been at least the people that we work with in our sector have been paying attention to this for quite a while. But I think what happened with Change Healthcare, and I can only speak to what we do here at HGA and with and working with our members, is we basically taken the approach that everybody should put themselves in the shoes of either Change and or United Healthcare and think about what that impact would look like if it was directly to them. Many, our members, others, the pharmacy partners that we work with have all been impacted by it. But what if it was a direct attack upon you? Are you ready? Are you prepared? And if not, what steps do you need to take to move forward? So one of the things that we've actually implemented and we've begun a project on is not only to ensure a greater state of operational readiness within HDA as an association, but also on behalf of our members, many of whom have already been working on this, as I said, for quite a while, but also begin to ask the questions on what would the level of engagement need to look like with the various government agencies should a distributor of scale be negatively impacted by a cyber attack. And so that's work that's underway right now, and we look forward to being able to report out on that as that work progresses.
You mentioned several times that high drug prices remain a major issue. Has HDA taken a position on what steps need to be done in order to alleviate the problem?
Yeah, again, this is not a new issue, as you know. I think sometimes the incredible degree of both innovation and access we enjoy here in the U.S. healthcare system gets swept under the rug because it's easy politics to say that drug prices are too high, when the reality, as I said below, for a majority of drugs in the United States on the generic side, some 90%, we have lower drug prices as a market basket than most developed other nations. There are expensive drugs in the market. That's not new, but look at some of the innovation we've had, whether it's going back to some of the products that have come out to cure hepatitis to what we're dealing with now in the GLP-1s. The level of innovation over the last decade has been jaw-dropping from my perspective as somebody who spent a large part of their career in the pharmaceutical manufacturing sector. I do think more visibility, quite frankly, into the supply chain is really important here. I will also say that I think situations where we are seeing, and whether it's in Medicare Part D or the commercial market, instances where the follow-on competitive products, right, whether it's a generic, Jeffrey, or a biosimilar, at the end of the intellectual property period for the branded agent, when a follow-on drug is approved by the FDA to compete in the market, when that drug is placed on a drug formulary for an insurance plan or a government plan that has a higher out-of-pocket expense for the patient, then the reality is the entire ecosystem or the balance that was originally envisioned by the Hatch-Waxman Act back in 1984 of follow-on competition with no clinical differentiation costing less money, which makes rational sense, it doesn't apply anymore. So what would be the incentive for a provider or a patient to switch to a follow-on competitive product if it necessitates a greater out-of-pocket expense for the patient? And so I think there's some very straightforward reforms. This is not a new issue per se, but we haven't gotten it over the finish line in terms of having Congress adopt policies like that. There's a significant amount of focus and attention, as you know, on PBM reform. I think part of the challenge is there's so many different ideas that have been bantered about. It's been hard for Congress to coalesce around one or two practical and pragmatic solutions. Looks like there may be another attempt to do it later this year in the lame duck session, and I think increasing that level of visibility will serve to benefit everybody that cares about the pharmaceutical ecosystem.
You talk about biotech medications. What kind of challenges does that present for people in the supply chain, and what are your members doing to respond to it?
Yeah, I think, again, the growing onset of personalized and specialty medicine is tremendous upside for patients here in the United States as well as the providers that treat them. What it's really required, and fortunately for us as distributors, we have some core expertise in the possession and the handling of products that might come with certain temperature controlled requirements, as an example, or unique ways of storing the product. That is only going to grow I think, over the years as products become more highly personalized and more specialized. And it's the nature of the working relationships that our distributor members have with the manufacturers. They're not only talking about what the requirements are for the current portfolio, but they're also talking about their products that are in development and what are the needs going to be when and if those products are approved by the government, by the FDA for the market. What are going to be the requirements that are needed so that we can have those capabilities ready to go? I think in COVID, the vaccines were a great example of that, where you had ultra cold chain requirements at the outset. And not that we didn't have the capacity for that as distributors, but the reality was in certain instances, the volume of vaccines that, as we know, in getting ready for the rollout was astronomical. So in short order, the distribution sector had to build greater capacity to be able to ensure the safety of those products as they were being rolled out, not just across the United States, but across the world.
And are you also working with the people on the other end of the supply chain, the pharmacies, and teaching them how to handle these products?
Absolutely. I think that's where, the skill set and the expertise of our members comes into full play, right? It's taking and harnessing the discussions that we have with the manufacturing community around the needs of their products, and then taking it and translating it down to what the requirements will need to be for the pharmacy community. And that includes at times holding inventory for the pharmacy for specialized products, but then being able to, in rapid response, be able to get it to the pharmacy counter or the hospital, the long-term care setting, you name it, when those products are needed.
Chip, a final question for you. HDA has launched a marketing initiative called We Are Health Delivered. Tell me a little bit about the program and what it is you hope to accomplish with it.
Yeah, Jeffrey, thanks for that question. One of the things that I found in my time here at HDA, which is a little over 4 years now, is that as the focus and attention on the entire healthcare supply chain, but in particular the pharmaceutical supply chain, has grown, and certainly that was increased by dealing with the pandemic, but that was kind of beginning even pre-pandemic, and coming out of it with some of the lessons learned is that there's a greater level of focus and attention by policymakers on the entire pharmaceutical ecosystem and the supply chain. And historically, I could argue that maybe distributors and the business model of distribution and the value that is created by distributors is not as well understood as, say, the manufacturing community or the provider community, the pharmacy community, and the like. And so one of the things we wanted to do is make sure, as sort of have that proverbial seat at the table, that there's a greater understanding of the value proposition that distributors, whether they be as large as a McKesson, a Cardinal, or a Cencora, or many of our regional members who play just as important a role in their constituencies and in their own backyards, that their capabilities are available to providers and patients alike. Their expertise is available to providers and patients alike. And defining the fact that distributors actually, as opposed to, say, others that find themselves between manufacturers and frontline providers, distributors actually take physical and legal possession of product, store that product, often at, as we said before, temperature-controlled requirements at great expense, and then turn around and distribute it downstream to partners. And the value that we provide in doing that, in connecting some 1,400 manufacturers to 300,000 plus points of care on a daily basis, some of them multiple times per day, and to do it for the lowest operating margins in the entire healthcare supply chain, I think is an astounding story that, as an industry, we feel now is more important for us to tell than at any time before.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. Always good to see you.
Always good to see you as well, Jeffrey. Thanks for your time.